Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Metroid Prime Remastered. In the last part, we entered the Chozo Ruins and got most of the power-ups we lost at the start of the game back. Missiles, morph ball bombs, charge beam, making the fact we lost them feel kind of inconsequential. Now that we have all of them, we can actually do things in this room we entered last part. Namely, we can now access all of the runic symbols that you may have been able to scan one or two of already and get to the top of the room and do stuff. Guess I probably should talk about that. It's funny in retrospect how easily Samus loses her abilities in Prime 1 to basically any of the other games she loses her powers in. Like, obviously there's the gaminess to it where you need to get all your upgrades in an upgradable fashion just because progression. But out of all the games where there's an excuse for why she loses her abilities, like this, Prime 2, Other M, Dread, this has, I think, the worst excuse because she just gets thrown back into a wall pretty hard. Which, considering the combat she gets into on the regular, just feels pretty weak. I'd say Other M's authorization system, as weird as that is in retrospect, that's probably still a better excuse because at least you could logic, well, she's just showing respect for a former CEO, blah 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 blah. Even the games where she just starts bare for starting bare's sake make more sense, just because it's like, alright, we gotta start from zero again. Sure. So now that we have all of our abilities, the main things you need to get into this area's higher sections are just the morph ball bombs, and I find that a little weird in some regards, because once you've unlocked all of these runic symbols, there's gonna be another wall for us to bomb just past it, and I want to say that's because in the original version, there was a branch you could stand on in this room that would allow you to jump up higher, breaking the level design a little bit. And I think that's still in some later versions of the original Prime, they just made it invisible. There's a lot of weird hidden collision stuff in the earlier versions of Prime 1 that you could jump on to just get to areas you weren't meant to earlier on. The scan dash especially helped with that because in the original version, the scan visor had a particularly fast dash, and that allowed you to even get some power-ups early on. There was some sequence breaking in earlier versions of the game. Major boss fight of the Chozo Ruins, this is Flaahgra. Let's see what the visor has to say about him. This mutant plant is the source of toxic water in the ruins. Flaahgra's growth cycle has been radically accelerated. As a result, it requires near constant exposure to solar energy to remain active. This exposure has made Flaahgra's outer shell thick and durable. Its lower root system is unprotected and vulnerable, however. Exploit this flaw when possible. Concentrated weapon fire can daze it for short periods. But on top of that, make sure you also scan their tentacles, because that is a separate scan. One of Flaahgra's tentacles fills the narrow of a drainage channel. Analysis indicates that Flaahgra's central nervous system is located at the base of the structure. So the way this boss fight works is you need to shoot the reflector dish that's sending sunlight directly at Flaahgra's base to stun him. At that point, the tentacles recede, we can morph ball into these tunnels, blow it up, and do about a quarter of its HP and damage. Rinse and repeat 4 times. Every new phase adds to the reflector dish. Thankfully, you don't need to get behind reflector dishes like I thought you had to as a kid to send them upwards. You can just charge shot them from a distance, which is easier with this control scheme, admittedly, as well as the motion controls of Trilogy. But it's a pretty easy boss. Notably, in the original releases of Prime 1, the music in this fight was bugged and it never reached its second phase, and it made this fight kind of annoying on a sound perspective. The more radar dishes there are, though, you will have to start shooting Flaahgra's main body to stun them temporarily, as eventually they just start whacking the radar dishes you shot upwards back down, and you just have to reset that one at that point. Around the time you get to 3 is where you really need to start doing that. Attack-wise, Flaahgra doesn't got a lot. they can swipe at you, they can breathe some poison gas at you, and they can create little walls of poisonous vegetation that can prevent you from moving in a certain direction. If anything, the weirder, harder thing about this fight is potentially reaching the Morph Ball tunnels at a certain point in time, because I believe Flaahgra does get back up eventually if you don't get to the next Morph Ball tunnel fast enough, and if they, in their stun state, fall down in between you and the nearest Morph Ball tunnel, reaching around in the full circle might extend that timer beyond its limit, and you just have to shoot all the radar dishes again. As a kid, this fight I honestly found pretty hard, but honestly, I think this is one of the easier bosses in the game nowadays, especially with this current control scheme, since you can just hit all the radar dishes from a pretty safe distance. There are some ways that the motion controls or twin stick controls make this game just really easy. It's sort of like how the Wii version of Resident Evil 4 is inherently the easiest version of that game because of what the auto knife can do with the waggle. But yeah, on first playthrough, it can still do enough damage, especially with the low amount of health you have, to be a distinct threat. Ooh, I wonder what this pretty item is. Also notably, Flaahgra and their tentacle is a missable scan, so make sure you scan them. Ah, shoulder pads. Safety and normalcy returns. So we got our Varia suit. We can now enter high temperature areas and low temperature areas without being damaged. On top of that, your defense does get increased. The main reason we went through all the Chozo Ruins to get all those power-ups was to get this in order to access our next area, because if you had accessed a certain elevator you could have found by this point beforehand, you would have been in an area too hot in the power suit to survive. Also notably, because we defeated Flaahgra, all of the water in the Chozo Ruins is no longer poisonous. You can walk in it no problem. With that said, that doesn't mean you actually get access to many new areas, because when you're in the water, Samus's control in especially jump are noticeably gimped in how high they can go. So we need another ability to go any kind of distance in water. But make sure while you're in this room you grab these Oculus enemies. They're only in a few rooms of the game. And I'm going to take care of these war wasps and their hives to scan a few things, namely a Chozo lore in here. On top of that though, while you're in the scan visor, you might notice there are some runic symbols in this room. You can't get all four of them though, because two of them are behind these cordite wall hangings. We don't have a way to destroy that yet though, unfortunately. The cries of this dying land echo in our ears as we Chozo watch the great poison seep ever further into the living pulse of the planet. The dark energy sinks into the trees and waters, devouring all life. Peaceful beasts die by the thousands. Some creatures survive, but their forms grow as twisted and evil as the force that fell from the sky. Many of these mutated monstrosities maintain small enough to do little harm, but others grow enormous and threaten our very existence. One such beast defiles our sacred fountain, disgorging poison from its foul form, replacing pure flowing water with cascades of creeping death. Even in the face of such horror, we Chozo do not turn in fear. We are all that stands in the way of this great poison, and it is our duty to contain it. So whatever this great poison is I guess what caused Flaahgra to get as large as they did. And here's another elevator. This is actually the one that you could have found by going a different path earlier, and I'm actually going to showcase that path right here in a moment, because before I go down to that next area, I want to take a gigantic circle through the level design we've partially been through before to grab some missile tanks and all that we can now get, now that we have the Morph Ball, the bombs, the Varia suit technically isn't needed for any of them, but it's good enough to have it, I guess. Also, I don't know why, there's a couple of key rooms that come to mind whenever I think of this game. This one right here is one of them for some reason, and I don't know why. Especially because it's right next to the main room of the Chozo Ruins, I think of for some reason, so More lore. The future is a vague thing, ever-changing and always in doubt. Even if we Chozo could gain the ability to foresee the future, it would be a hollow gift, we could never hope to control what is yet to occur. The fountain is an example of this. The day may come when its waters dries up, and there's nothing we could do to stop such a tragedy. But we do know this, unlike the uncertain flow of water, the power of our will is strong and enduring. The will of the Chozo will never run dry. Even if the amount of them will. So something I should note about this game's level design, you could have seen a little bit of this last part even. The map room we got not too far from where we got our first missile expansion, in the room with the blast caps and all that. We're going to be back there in a few moments anyway. If you paid attention to the rooms we were exploring the last part, you may have noticed that the furnace area where I got that energy tank wasn't on the map at all. By and large, every region in Metroid Prime that has a map room has 2 of them. And that's because they only reveal about half of the total map to not overwhelm the player with the amount of rooms you see at once. On top of that, it's to more gently guide you in directions that organically you've already come across. So with the amount of map we have, you could look around and go, okay, I haven't been down that elevator we passed a moment ago, so maybe the next direction I need to go is that way. It's to softly guide you, and I appreciate that because at times, games that have too big of a map and have revealed too much of you at once can be rather overwhelming. That's actually one of my problems with Hollow Knight. I think that game is far too big for its own good to begin with, yes, but especially the way the map unfolds, while it gives you a lot of options, can be rather overwhelming if you're someone who prefers their Metroids like this or Symphony of the Night, in terms of explorability growth. So in this room where we got a save room in the first part, if memory serves, as well as where we first fought War Wasps, now that we have Morph Ball bombs, we can access these Morph Ball tunnels and go get ourselves a missile expansion. Notably, down the line in this LP, this chain of rooms we're going through is going to be one I speed up pretty frequently just because we've seen it already at this point twice. Because the elevator we're heading towards right now is one we're going to be accessing relatively frequently. And that goes into a minor problem I have with this game's world structure, but I'll talk more about that probably at least 3 parts from now. Plus, there's items for us to grab along the way, so we might as well grab them. There might be a way to grab this missile expansion without having the bombs and thus the spring ball. If there is, it's probably a very tight roll, and I've probably never done it. I haven't done a lot of the more intricate speedrunny type tech in this game. Because the version of this game I grew up with, admittedly, as a kid, was one of the later versions of the GameCube release. So a lot of the, like, speedrun tech, like scan dashing and all that, had been patched out already, unfortunately. Like I mentioned a moment ago, there's some notable speed sequence breaks. One of them, for instance, allows you to get a power-up right near the start of the game pretty early. Another allows you to get to Flaahgra early, I believe. I think about half of the main items have some form to get them early in the original GameCube release. And to the speedrunning community's credit with Prime Remastered, in the short time it's already been out, they've found ways to get a lot of the power-ups out of order again. With that said, I believe a lot of those tricks were also possible in Prime Trilogy, because I believe Remastered's by and large based off the Trilogy release of Prime. There are some geometry changes, I know, like there's a new way to get the ability right near the start of the game again. And that requires at the least Morph Ball bombs and a relatively precise jump. But I'm probably not going to do them anytime soon. The only Metroid I've really cared about the speedrunning communities for is Super overall, because that's just the iconic one. And when the game was new, I did a couple of Dread speedruns myself on my own time, using particularly the suitless route, which I might show off when I get to doing an LP of that. I still haven't updated the game past its initial release state, so some of the glitches are still possible, like the invincibility one. I originally had a plan to do 3 playthroughs of that on the channel, but I have yet to do any of them because procrastination. With that said, welcome to the Magmoor Caverns, as we'll find out here really quickly. It's the lava area. I believe as soon as you got to this area, you would start taking damage from pure heat. Either that or from the next room, so you needed the various suit to progress in here, basically at all. Lava, though, does still damage us with the various suit, and its rate accelerates, so be careful of that. The first time they ever reused the lower Norfair song from Super Metroid, actually, here, before this just became synonymous with fire areas like it started being in the last decade or so. In fact, this is actually when I first heard this song. So, Magmoor Caverns has a couple enemies you need to be careful of. Those puffers are one of them. When they explode, they leave poison gas behind that can damage you. But you also kind of want to be careful of the Magmoors themselves, because they can do a lot of damage to you pretty quickly if you're actively fighting them. As you'll see throughout this game, I tend to ignore a lot of enemies just because they're not worth the drops they might give me. I tend to only fight enemies if it's a first time, or if I'm forced to fight them, like these guys here. These enemies are annoying in that they're there just to eject you from areas that you're entering with the Morph Ball. You can trick them with your bombs, but sometimes they're just moving up slowly but also fast enough to just get you in some weird positions. I dislike that enemy type greatly. Magmoor as an area, though, is interesting to me, because I know I called Chozo Ruins like the main hub for a lot of the game last part, if memory serves. By and large, when it comes to how you get between areas, Magmoor Caverns is the area you're going to be in the most throughout the game, so get used to venturing through its tunnels. But while we're in this room, we actually want to come down here into this Morph Ball section underneath the grating, because this allows us to get to another missile tank. Albeit weirdly, it's off in its own little side room, which there's a couple of times in the Prime series where they're just like, here's a room off to the side that the only purpose of is a single missile tank. And I always find that kind of weird, but I guess it's better than just like forcing a weird puzzle into a room that's already got too much into it. I want to say on my first playthrough of Prime, I found about 60 to 80% of the items-ish. My repeat playthroughs that I often used a guide for back on the GameCube, back in the early days of NeoSeeker and GameFAQs, I did a lot better about getting 100% logs just because of that. Talking about the music, though, I say this in the area that, of course, is like the one really major remix in the game. Prime 1's soundtrack is fantastic. It does a good job at having really catchy melodies while also enhancing the atmosphere of the area. I would count it close to Super Metroid in that regard. It's not my favorite Metroid soundtrack. I am forever a diehard Zero Mission soundtrack enjoyer. But I don't think there's really a Metroid soundtrack I don't enjoy, barring probably most of Prime 2's, but because I can't remember a lot of it outside of the Lower Brainstar remix in the game, the Luminoth theme, and a couple of others here and there. But in that aspect, same with Prime 3, despite me liking that game's soundtrack direction, so to speak. So we got this gigantic, I think it's meant to be like an energy redirection center here. This is like the central room for a lot of Magmoor Caverns. And we want to climb up it because the door that was on the same level as us down there leads to a dead end at the moment. I always make sure to scan some things in this little building, though, but you don't need to because there's not a pirate log. I just always remember there being one for some reason. This next room's kind of interesting, though. In here, there's an energy tank we can get. And to get it, you have to do double bomb jumps consistently to get from one area to the next in here. But the block I'm on top of right now gets broken after 2 bomb uses on top of it. So it's meant to get the double bomb jump and then collapse. So if you mess up, you just fall down into the lava and take some damage. But because Trilogy and Remaster have the Spring Ball, the threat of that puzzle is completely erased, and thank God. I hated that energy tank so much when I was a kid. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 4, we're going to access our next area, the Phendrana Drifts. See you guys then.